Underground Moscow. The air carried the stench of rust and desperation through concrete corridors, mixing with the smell of expensive cigars and cold sweat. It was the kind of place where screams were expected and silence was survival. Men gathered in the abandoned subway station, drawn by the promise of forbidden merchandise, power plays, and something darker. Her name was Alyssa Martinez, 19 years old, thin cotton dress stained at the edges, wrists shackled in front of her like she was holding on to the last pieces of herself that couldn't escape. Susie Overcash dragged her into the circle of light like she was inventory being catalogued. She's clean, compliant, and knows when to keep quiet, Susie said, gold rings glinting as she gestured. Whoever's got the capital can collect her tonight. The crowd didn't react. Not with cheers, but the stillness between the whispers was worse. Shadows shifted, cigarette tips flared like predator eyes in the dark. Alyssa stood there, the cold concrete biting through her thin shoes, but the emptiness beneath it cut deeper. Medical student before she was acquired, Susie added, her smile sharp. Smart hands, wasted potential. But she's still young enough, still got use in her. Alyssa didn't plead. She'd done that before. Once, when the traffickers first took her from the shelter where she'd been sleeping. Once, when their fists taught her that words only made the pain last longer. It hadn't mattered then. So she stood in silence now. Near the back of the auction hall, a woman she didn't recognize stood against the wall. Fur coat pulled tight despite the underground heat. Eyes fixed on a ledger in her hands. Mouth set in a business line. The woman didn't bid, didn't acknowledge the horror, just calculated. And when the next girl was brought out, she made a note and turned away. Another transaction witnessed and forgotten. The steel door at the far end opened. Cold air from the surface rushed in. A man entered, and the room changed. Conversations stopped mid-word. Cigarettes were stubbed out. Even Susie's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. David Voronov moved through the crowd like winter itself, tailored charcoal suit, ice blue eyes that missed nothing, a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow like a warning written in flesh. 2 armed men flanked him, but he didn't need them. His presence was enough. He didn't look at the other buyers, didn't acknowledge Susie's hurried greeting. His gaze locked onto Alyssa, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt seen, not assessed, not appraised, but seen. Like he recognized something in her hollow eyes that the others had missed. Bidding starts at 1 million rubles, Susie announced, her voice pitched higher now, nervous energy bleeding through her professional veneer. Hands began to rise. A man in a leather jacket, an oligarch with dead eyes, a businessman whose smile made Alyssa's skin crawl. 2 million. David raised one finger. Just one. The gesture was so slight, so controlled, that it took a moment for the room to register. 5 million rubles, he said, his voice carrying the finality of a vault door closing. The auction hall went silent. Not the silence of anticipation, but the silence of prey, recognizing an apex predator. Susie's professional mask cracked into something like fear before she forced it back into place. Sold, she said quickly. Too quickly. To Mr. Voronov. To Mr. Voronov. The shackles came off Alyssa's wrists, replaced by a bodyguard's firm but not cruel grip on her arm. She was led through the maze of corridors, up rusted stairs, and out into the Moscow night where snow fell like ash from a funeral pyre. A black armored SUV waited, engine running, exhaust steaming in the frozen air. The door opened. Inside sat David Voronov, sharp cheekbones catching the dim interior light, hands folded precisely in his lap, that scar a reminder that even monsters bleed. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak, didn't justify or explain. Alyssa climbed in because she had no choice, because choices had been taken from her so long ago she'd forgotten what they felt like. The door closed with the sound of a tomb sealing. The convoy moved through Moscow's snow-covered streets like a procession of the damned, and Alyssa sat across from the most dangerous man in Russia, wondering if this was rescue or just a different kind of cage. And in the terrible silence, David Voronov looked at her once, just once, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. Something that looked like recognition, like he'd bought her not because he wanted to own her, but because he couldn't stand to see what she'd become. The city lights blurred past the bulletproof windows, and neither of them spoke, because some transactions can't be explained in words, only in what comes after. Alyssa woke to silk sheets that felt like accusations against her skin. The room was vast, too vast. Cream walls with gold trim that caught morning light filtering through barred windows. She noticed immediately, her eyes trained to catalogue exits and traps. A 4-poster bed with curtains she hadn't closed. Furniture that cost more than everything she'd owned in her previous life combined. A door with an ornate handle that didn't turn when she tried it. She was still wearing the thin dress from the auction. Someone had removed her shoes while she slept unconscious. She corrected herself. Because sleep implied choice and safety, and she'd had neither. Her feet were bare on plush carpet that swallowed sound. The room had no mirrors. She didn't know if that was kindness or strategy. A knock came at 8 in the morning, soft but deliberate. Alyssa didn't answer. The lock clicked anyway, and an older woman entered, carrying a silver tray. She had grey hair pulled into a neat bun, kind eyes that had seen too much, and hands that moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in service. "Good morning," the woman said in Russian, her accent warm. "I am Irina. I've brought breakfast." Alyssa remained motionless on the edge of the bed, knees pulled to her chest, watching. Irina set the tray on a table by the window, fresh bread, soft cheese, sliced fruit arranged like an apology. "Mr. Voronov asked that you eat. You must be hungry." Silence. "There are clothes in the wardrobe," Irina continued, gesturing to the massive wooden cabinet. "Your size, I believe. The bathroom is through that door. Hot water, towels, anything you need." Alyssa's gaze didn't shift from the locked door behind Irina. The older woman's expression softened with something that looked like pity, which made Alyssa's jaw tighten. She didn't want pity. Pity was just cruelty wearing a gentle mask. "I know this is frightening," Irina said quietly. "But you are safe here. Mr. Voronov does not. He is not like the others." The others. As if there was a taxonomy of monsters, a hierarchy of men who bought women like merchandise. As if being at the top of that hierarchy made him different. Alyssa turned her face toward the window, dismissing her. Irina hesitated, then left the tray and retreated, the lock engaging behind her with a sound like teeth clicking shut. The food sat untouched. Hours passed. Alyssa didn't move from the bed except to test the door again locked and examine the window's reinforced glass, iron bars that were decorative but functional, a 3-story drop to a courtyard below where armed men patrolled. She counted them, 6 visible, which meant at least 12 total. She catalogued their routes, their shift changes, the way they moved with military precision, old habits, survival habits. In his office 2 floors below, David Voronov sat in darkness, lit only by the glow of security monitors. He'd been there since dawn, telling himself he was reviewing overnight reports, checking perimeter security, analyzing intelligence on Kadyrov movements, but his eyes kept returning to screen 7. The bedroom. The girl who sat motionless on the bed like a statue of something broken. She hadn't touched the food, hadn't changed clothes, hadn't cried or raged or done any of the things he'd anticipated. She just sat there, waiting for whatever came next with the patience of someone who'd learned that fighting only made the pain last longer. Viktor had called twice. The Bratva Council wanted answers. His enemies were already circulating rumors. David ignored them all, watching a girl who refused to eat in a room full of abundance, and wondered what the hell he'd actually bought, or saved, or damned. The war room smelled of tobacco and old grudges. 12 men sat around the mahogany table, each representing a branch of the Voronov Bratva's empire: extortion, trafficking, arms, narcotics, legitimate fronts that laundered blood money into clean investments. They'd built this together over 2 decades, and they knew their power came from appearing untouchable. Viktor Sokolov sat at David's right hand, the position he'd held since they were teenagers running protection rackets in Moscow's gutted industrial districts. He waited until the quarterly reports were finished, until the room had settled into the comfortable rhythm of men who believed they controlled their world. Then he struck. "We need to discuss your recent acquisition," Viktor said, his tone carefully neutral, which made it more dangerous. "The girl from the auction." The room went still. David didn't look up from the financial ledger in front of him. 5 million rubles, Viktor continued, "for a trafficked girl. Half our captains are asking questions. Our partners are concerned about your judgment. Are they?" David's voice carried no inflection, no question mark, just flat acknowledgement. "You've made us look weak," another captain said, emboldened by Viktor's opening. "Buying damaged goods from that market, it's beneath us. It suggests sentiment. Weakness." David closed the ledger with deliberate precision. When he looked up, his ice-blue eyes held the temperature of a Siberian winter. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I spend my money." "It's not about the money," Viktor said, leaning forward. "It's about perception. The Kadyrovs are already circulating rumors. They're saying you've gone soft, that you're compromised, that maybe it's time for new leadership." The threat hung in the air, like gun smoke. David stood slowly, the movement making every man at the table tense. "I answer to no one in this room," he said quietly, which was worse than shouting. "Not you, Viktor. Not the council. Not our enemies. If you have concerns about my leadership, you're welcome to challenge me directly, instead of hiding behind rumors and implications." Viktor's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to protect what we've built by questioning my authority in front of the entire council." David's smile had no warmth in it. "That's not protection. That's ambition poorly disguised as concern." The silence that followed was the kind that preceded violence. David placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. "The girl stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave, permanently." No one moved. Viktor's knuckles went white against the armrest, but he didn't speak. The meeting ended 10 minutes later, with fractures no one acknowledged aloud. That night, David found himself outside Alyssa's door at 2 in the morning, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and no good explanation for why he was there. He could see her on the monitor, still awake, still sitting in the same position, still refusing everything Irina brought. He sat down with his back against the wall, the wood cool through his shirt. "I know you're not sleeping," he said to the door. His voice was quieter than it had been in the war room, stripped of authority, just tired. "I know you can hear me." Silence from the other side. "They want me to get rid of you. My second in command thinks you're a liability." He's probably right. David took a drink, the burn familiar. "Sentiment is weakness in my world. Caring about anything makes you a target." He paused, listening to the absence of response. "I saw someone who refused to break," he continued, the words coming easier in darkness. "To someone who wouldn't answer, standing in that auction hall with nothing left. And you still wouldn't beg. You still looked them in the eye. I needed to know if that was still possible. If someone could lose everything and still not surrender." The whiskey glass was empty. David set it aside. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted to the locked door, to the girl who wouldn't eat, to the emptiness he'd been carrying since Katya died. "But you're staying. Whether you want to or not." He stood, retrieved his glass, and walked away. Inside the room, Alyssa remained motionless on the bed, but her eyes had shifted toward the door. She'd heard every word. The ambush came on the 3rd day, on a route David had used 100 times before, which meant someone inside had talked. Alyssa sat in the back of the armored SUV, flanked by bodyguards who treated her like volatile cargo. David was in the vehicle ahead, visible through the reinforced windshield. They were transferring from the penthouse to a secure compound outside the city, Victor's suggestion, which should have been the first warning. The RPG hit the lead vehicle's rear axle, flipping it sideways in a screech of metal and shattered glass. Gunfire erupted from the buildings on both sides. Planned, coordinated, professional. The driver of Alyssa's SUV jerked the wheel, trying to reverse, but the second explosion took out their front tire. The vehicle lurched, slammed into a concrete barrier, and the world became broken glass and the copper taste of blood in her mouth. She was dragged from the wreckage by hands she didn't recognize. Smoke everywhere. Screaming. The methodical crack of assault rifles. One of her guards went down with a bullet in his throat, arterial spray painting the snow crimson. Then she saw David. He'd gotten out of the overturned lead vehicle, blood streaming from a gash above his eye, suit jacket torn. He was firing back with mechanical precision, dropping attackers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this since childhood. But there were too many angles, too much chaos. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He stumbled, went to one knee in the blood-stained snow. Alyssa's paralysis broke. She didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her, would have reminded her that staying invisible was survival, that helping anyone had only ever brought more pain. But her body remembered other things: anatomy, lectures, clinical rotations, the muscle memory of saving lives before hers was destroyed. She ran through the gunfire, dropped beside David as his remaining guards formed a defensive perimeter. His shoulder was leaking blood too fast, the dark arterial red that meant minutes, not hours. "Get back," he managed through clenched teeth, trying to push her away with his good hand. She ripped the sleeve off his ruined shirt, saw the entry wound high on the shoulder. The bullet lodged near the subclavian artery. Her hands moved automatically, applying pressure, angling the wound to slow the bleeding. "Whiskey," she said to the nearest guard, her voice rough from days of silence. "Now." The man hesitated, looking between her and his dying boss. "Now." The command in her voice surprised even her. A flask appeared. She poured it over the wound. David's entire body went rigid, then packed the injury with torn fabric from her own dress, applying targeted pressure to the artery while avoiding the bullet. "You need a hospital," she said, her hands steady even as the world exploded around them. "This won't hold long." David's eyes focused on her through the pain and shock, really seeing her for the first time since the auction. "Your medical?" "Was." She tied off the makeshift bandage with a strip of his shirt, her fingers working with the precision of someone who'd done this in trauma bays at 3 a.m. Before, reinforcements arrived, more Bratva soldiers, a armored medical van. They loaded David onto a stretcher, but his hand caught her wrist, grip weak but insistent. "You're not supposed to care," he whispered, delirious from blood loss and betrayal, his ice-blue eyes searching hers for an answer he couldn't name. Alyssa pulled her wrist free, her expression unreadable. "I don't," she said flatly. "You're just worth more alive." She climbed into the medical van without being asked, without permission, because he was still bleeding and the paramedic looked barely competent. The doors slammed shut, and they raced toward the private hospital, leaving behind 6 dead attackers and the wreckage of vehicles that would be gone by morning, sanitized like the ambush never happened. But David's blood was still on her hands, dark and real, and for the first time in 2 years, Alyssa had chosen to touch another human being. The cost of that choice was still to come. The emergency council meeting was called while David's shoulder was still bandaged, the stitches barely 48 hours old. Victor didn't waste time with pretense. "The ambush was a message," he said, standing at the head of the table like he'd already claimed the position. "Our enemies see weakness. They see a man compromised by sentiment, distracted by a girl who should have been disposed of the moment she became a liability." 3 captains nodded: Dmitri, Alexei, and Yuri. Men David had promoted, enriched, trusted. The rest watched in careful silence, waiting to see which way the power would shift. "She saved his life," someone pointed out. Convenient, Victor countered, almost like the attack was designed to create exactly that situation, to make him feel indebted, compromised. David sat at his usual position, one arm in a sling, his expression unreadable. He'd known this was coming. The only question was how far Victor would push. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence," Victor said. And there it was. David Voronov is unfit to lead. His judgment is compromised. The girl goes, or he does. In the adjacent room, a study separated by a bookshelf with one-way glass, Alyssa stood frozen. Irina had brought her here, told her to wait, wouldn't explain why. Now she understood. She was watching her own execution being debated by men in expensive suits. David stood slowly, favoring his injured shoulder. When he spoke, his voice carried the temperature of permafrost. "Victor, you've been my brother for 20 years, so I'm going to give you one chance to withdraw that motion and walk out of this room alive." "You've gone soft," Victor said. "The Bratva needs strength, not sentiment." David's hand moved so fast, the motion blurred. The suppressed pistol appeared from inside his jacket, the shot barely louder than a cough. Dmitri went down with a hole in his forehead, dead before he understood he'd chosen the wrong side. Alexei reached for his weapon. David shot him through the throat. The room erupted in shouting, chairs scraping back, but David's remaining loyalists had their guns out now, covering the others. The message was clear: this ended here, one way or another. Victor's face had gone pale. "You'd kill your own men over a whore. I'd kill my own men over betrayal," David corrected, the gun now pointed at Victor's chest. "You used the girl as an excuse. This was always about your ambition." Through the one-way glass, Alyssa watched the man who'd sat outside her door, confessing his doubts, execute two men with the casual efficiency of swatting flies. No hesitation, no remorse, just brutal, absolute authority. This was who he really was. Not the tired voice in the darkness, but the monster who ruled through fear. "You're exiled," David said to Victor. 24 hours to leave Russia. If I see you again, I won't be this merciful." Victor left, rage and humiliation burning in his eyes. The remaining captains bent the knee. David holstered the gun and walked out, blood spatter on his shirt, moving like nothing had happened. In the adjacent room, Alyssa pressed her back against the wall, her hands shaking for the first time since the auction, trying to reconcile the two versions of the same man, and realizing she couldn't. Irina found Alyssa in the study 3 hours after the execution, still standing against the wall, still processing what she'd witnessed. The older woman's expression was knowing, sad in the way of someone who'd seen this pattern before. "Come," she said simply. "I'll make tea." They sat in Irina's small quarters off the kitchen, a space that felt more human than the rest of the fortress. The housekeeper poured dark tea into delicate cups, added sugar without asking, and waited. "He's a monster," Alyssa said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Irina agreed, which was somehow worse than denial. But he wasn't always. She pulled a photograph from a drawer, faded, creased from years of handling. A younger David, maybe 16, his face not yet hardened into the mask he wore now. Beside him stood a girl, perhaps 12, with wild dark curls and his same ice-blue eyes. She was laughing, caught mid-motion, full of life. "Katya," Irina said, "his sister. Their parents died when David was 15, car accident, though some said it wasn't. He raised her himself, kept her away from the business, sent her to good schools. She was going to be a doctor." Alyssa's fingers traced the edge of the photograph without touching it. "The Kadyrov syndicate took her 7 years ago. Revenge for territory, David had claimed. They sent her back in pieces." Irina's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly around her teacup. He was 23. After that, the man in this photograph died. What's left is what you saw today. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you look at him and see a monster," Irina said. "But monsters are made, not born. And maybe if someone could see both versions, the before and after, They might understand that he's as trapped as you are. The next morning, Alyssa found the stairs to the rooftop. The door was unlocked, which surprised her until she realized David had probably ordered it. A test, maybe, or an offering of trust. The garden was dead. Raised beds filled with frozen earth. Skeletal rose bushes black with frost. A small greenhouse with shattered panes that let in the Moscow winter. No one had touched this place in years. The snow had drifted undisturbed, covering what had once been carefully tended paths. But beneath the death, Alyssa could see the ghost of what it had been. Someone had loved this garden once, had planned it with care, chosen plants that would bloom in sequence, created a refuge above the violence below. She knelt beside a raised bed, brushed away snow with numb fingers, and found a small marker stone, Katya's sanctuary. The pieces assembled themselves. A sister who wanted to be a doctor, a garden she'd tended, a brother who'd preserved it exactly as she'd left it, unable to revive it but unwilling to let it be erased. Alyssa stood there as the sun set over Moscow, looking at dead roses and frozen earth, and understood for the first time that David Voronov was exactly what Irina had said, a man trapped by his past, by choices made and losses endured, by the monster he'd had to become to survive his grief, just like her. The parallel was uncomfortable, unwanted, but undeniable. She came back the next day, and the day after that, standing among the dead garden like a ghost herself. Two broken people separated by locked doors and years of trauma, each trying to figure out if redemption was even possible. The video arrived encrypted, sent through channels only the Kadyrov syndicate would dare use. David opened it alone in his office at 3 a.m, the hour when all his ghosts were loudest. The footage was recent. Alyssa, on the rooftop garden, kneeling beside Katya's marker stone, her face caught in profile as she brushed snow from frozen earth. The camera angle was precise, professional. Someone had been watching for days, maybe weeks, cataloging her movements with the patience of predators planning a kill. The video cut to black. Then text appeared in Russian. White letters on darkness. You stole merchandise from the market. Bad form, Voronov. Return what belongs to the trade or we take it back in pieces. You have 72 hours. RK. Ramzan Kadyrov's signature. As good as a death warrant. David watched the video 3 more times, each viewing revealing new details, the sophistication of the surveillance, the deliberate choice to film her at Katya's memorial, the message within the message. They knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. He doubled the perimeter guards, installed new cameras, locked down every entrance. His security chief suggested moving Alyssa to a safe house outside the city, somewhere isolated and defensible. No, David said. They'd expect that. We stay here. But he knew the truth. The attack was inevitable. The only question was how much blood it would cost. He found Alyssa on the rooftop at dawn, sitting on the edge of a planter box, her breath misting in the frozen air. She didn't turn when he approached, but he knew she'd heard him. She always did. They're coming for you, he said, dispensing with pretense. The Kadyrovs. They know you're here. They're using you to get to me. I know, she replied quietly. Irina told me about the video. Of course she had. Irina saw too much, cared too much, despite years in this world teaching her not to. David moved closer, careful to leave space between them. I can send you away. Different country, new identity, money to start over. You'd be free of this. Free, Alyssa repeated, the word strange in her mouth. Is that what you call it? Running to a new cage, waiting for the next monster to find me. It's survival. It's cowardice. She finally looked at him, her dark eyes holding something fierce he hadn't seen before. I've been running my entire life. From foster homes, from poverty, from the men who took me. I'm tired of running. They'll kill you to hurt me, David said bluntly. That's what they do. That's what I did to Kadyrov's brother 5 years ago. This is revenge with interest. Then let them come. Her voice was steady, certain. I'm not leaving. You don't understand what you're choosing. I understand perfectly. Alyssa stood, facing him fully. For the first time since I was taken, I'm choosing something. Not survival, not escape. I'm choosing to stay and fight. Even if it kills me, at least it's my choice. David studied her face, seeing the girl from the auction who'd stared down a room full of predators, the medical student who'd saved his life in the snow, the ghost who'd knelt at his sister's memorial. 72 hours, he said. Then we have 72 hours to prepare. The first time she'd used we. They came at midnight on the third day, when exhaustion had worn down even the most vigilant guards. The first explosion took out the east wall generator, plunging half the penthouse into darkness. The second came through the reinforced garage entrance, a breach point only someone with intimate knowledge of the building's layout would know. Victor's betrayal, made manifest in fire and tactical precision. David was in the security hub when the alarms screamed. He saw them on the monitors, 12 men, maybe more, moving with military coordination through smoke and chaos. Kadyrov's elite unit, the ones who specialized in extractions and executions. Get her to the safe room, he ordered into his radio, already moving, already knowing it was too late. The firefight erupted across 3 floors. David's men were good, loyal, but the attackers had every advantage: blueprint knowledge, cutting-edge equipment, and the element of shock. Bodies fell on both sides, blood painting the pristine marble floors in abstract patterns. Alyssa was with Irina when the door to her suite exploded inward. The housekeeper went down with shrapnel in her leg, and then there were hands grabbing Alyssa, professionals who knew exactly how to immobilize without killing. She fought anyway, bit, clawed, went for the eyes like David's people had taught her during the 72 hours of preparation. It wasn't enough. David reached the hallway as they were dragging her toward the breached entrance. He dropped 2 attackers with headshots, advanced through their return fire with the single-minded purpose of a man who'd already lost everyone who mattered once before. The third bullet caught him in the chest, just left of center. Kevlar stopped it from being immediately fatal, but the impact drove him to his knees. The fourth went through his thigh, arterial, the same kind of wound Alyssa had saved him from weeks ago. Through the smoke and his own blood loss, he saw her. They had her in a tactical carry, hands zip-tied, headed for the extraction point. But she wasn't screaming or begging. Her eyes found his across the chaos, and what he saw there wasn't fear. It was rage, pure, incandescent fury that she'd chosen to stay, to fight, and was being taken anyway. David! Her voice cut through the gunfire, raw and defiant. He tried to stand, tried to raise his weapon, but his leg buckled. The world tilted sideways, grey creeping in at the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Alyssa being carried through the breach, still fighting, still refusing to break. Her eyes locked on his until the smoke swallowed her whole. His remaining guards found him in a spreading pool of his own blood, unconscious but alive, while the building burned around him and the enemy vanished into Moscow's pre-dawn darkness. They'd taken her. Victor had given them the keys to his kingdom, and they'd stolen the one thing David hadn't known he couldn't afford to lose. When he woke 6 hours later in the private hospital, stitched and transfused and alive, the first word he spoke was her name. The second word was war. David left the hospital against medical orders, the bullet wound in his thigh still seeping through fresh bandages. He held court from a reinforced SUV, calling in every debt, every alliance, every favor accumulated over 15 years of calculated brutality. The Chechens owed him for a weapons shipment that had saved their supply lines. The Armenians remembered when he'd eliminated their rivals in the heroin trade. The corrupt FSB colonel who'd been on his payroll since the beginning provided coordinates, surveillance, real-time intelligence on Kadyrov movements. "I want her back," David said into encrypted phones, his voice carrying the promise of reciprocal violence. "I want every Kadyrov holding burned to the ground. I want Ramzan to understand what it costs to take what's mine." Moscow burned that night. David's forces hit 6 locations simultaneously: warehouses, safe houses, the nightclub Kadyrov used as his headquarters. It wasn't strategy, it was scorched earth. The message was simple: return her, or watch your empire turn to ash. The city's underworld chose sides or went to ground. Police stayed away from the conflict zones, paid to be blind. By dawn, 12 Kadyrov soldiers were dead, and 3 facilities were smoking ruins. But Alyssa wasn't in any of them. In a basement beneath a condemned factory in Moscow's industrial district, Alyssa woke to the smell of mold and her own blood. They'd beaten her during transport professional work, designed to hurt without permanent damage. Her ribs were bruised, her lips split, but her hands were only zip-tied in front, which was their first mistake. The basement held 4 other women, all younger, all terrified. Trafficking inventory, Alyssa realized. She was just another piece of merchandise to be moved, sold, disappeared. The guard who brought water was their second mistake. Young, overconfident, distracted by his phone. When he bent to set down the bottles, Alyssa's zip-tied hands came up and around his throat from behind, the plastic edge cutting into his carotid with the precision of someone who'd studied anatomy. He thrashed, clawed, reached for his weapon. She held on with the strength of 2 years of rage finding its target, whispering through clenched teeth, "You should have killed me when you had the chance." He went limp. She took his gun, his keys, his radio. The first time she'd chosen violence. The first time she'd been the one inflicting pain instead of enduring it. It felt like power, terrifying and intoxicating. She freed the other women, moved them through the factory's maze of corridors, using skills learned from planning escapes she'd never had the courage to attempt. 2 guards at the exit, she shot one. The other fled when he saw 4 freed captives, and a girl with dead eyes holding a weapon like she'd been waiting her whole life to use it. They emerged into Moscow's industrial wasteland as dawn broke. Alyssa used the guard's phone to call the only number she'd memorized, David's private line, the one Irina had made her learn during those 72 hours. Across the city, David's phone rang. He answered, expecting another report of failure. "It's me," Alyssa said, her voice steady despite everything. "I'm out, and I'm bringing company." David's convoy arrived at the factory coordinates Alyssa had transmitted, expecting to extract her from hiding. Instead, he found a war zone, bodies in the street, the building's entrance blown open, smoke pouring from shattered windows, and the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire echoing from inside. She was still in there. He didn't wait for tactical assessment or backup positioning. He went through the entrance with 4 of his best, moving through the smoke-filled corridors with the muscle memory of 100 similar assaults. The limp from his thigh wound slowed him, but rage was a powerful anesthetic. They found her on the 2nd floor, backed into a corner office with the 4 freed women behind her. 3 Kadyrov soldiers had her pinned down, and she was returning fire with a half-empty magazine and the cold precision of someone who'd already decided she wasn't going to die quietly. David's appearance shifted the equation. His team took the soldiers from behind, brutal, efficient, no prisoners. When the gunfire stopped, Alyssa lowered her weapon, her hands shaking now that the immediate threat had passed. "You came," she said like she'd doubted. "Always," he replied, and meant it with a certainty that terrified him. The building was collapsing, fires spreading through the old factory's wooden supports. They got the women out first, then followed through flames and falling debris. Ramzan Kadyrov's voice crackled over the radio David had taken from a dead soldier, promising retribution, swearing vengeance. Outside, in the grey Moscow dawn, David's empire was in ruins. Half his captains were dead or scattered. Viktor had escaped to Chechnya with tactical intelligence worth millions. The Kadyrovs would regroup, and next time they'd come harder. His reputation was shattered, the untouchable Voronov brought low by sentiment, by caring about one trafficked girl. Alyssa stood beside him, covered in soot and blood, watching the factory burn. The freed women were being loaded into vehicles, given blankets and medical attention, offered choices instead of chains. "You should leave," David said quietly. "I can protect you for maybe another week, but after that, the best I can offer is a running start. New identity, new country, enough money to disappear properly. Number Alyssa. I am not leaving. She turned to face him, her dark eyes steady. Your empire is half destroyed. Your enemies are circling. You are wounded, compromised, and probably going to spend the next year fighting for survival. And I am staying. Why? The question came out raw, genuine confusion from a man who'd learned that everyone eventually left. Because for the first time in my life, I am choosing something that is mine. Not running, not surviving, but building. She looked back at the burning factory, at the dawn breaking over Moscow's industrial wasteland. We're both broken. We're both trapped by what was done to us. But maybe broken people can build something new if they stop running from each other. David had no answer for that. No protocol, no tactical response, no way to calculate the cost-benefit of hope. 3 weeks later, the first thaw came to Moscow. They were on the rooftop garden, kneeling in dirt that was finally soft enough to work. Alyssa had brought seeds roses. Her voice had said, the same kind Katya had planted. David provided the tools, the soil amendments, the careful removal of 7 years of frozen death. His hand covered hers in the earth. Both of them scarred, both of them stained with choices that couldn't be undone. Around them, the city sprawled in its usual chaos sirens. Traffic. The machinery of a world that didn't care about two people planting flowers in the ruins of an empire. It might not grow, David said. It might, Alyssa replied, pressing seeds into soil with the same determination she'd shown standing in that auction hall, refusing to break. But we'll never know unless we try. They planted in silence as the sun rose higher, melting the last of the winter snow. Two broken souls choosing redemption over resignation, hope over the comfortable numbness of survival. The empire would rebuild, or it wouldn't. Enemies would come, or they'd scatter. The future was uncertain, dangerous, probably violent. But in the dirt of a dead garden coming slowly back to life, they chose each other, and that choice, terrifying and fragile and utterly without guarantee, was the first truly free thing either of them had ever done.